Hello and welcome to the next episode of The Podcast, a cannabis podcast for budding enthusiasts. As you're joined by your host, Heavy Days, and this episode, as always, was brought to you by our incredible sponsors. Seedsherenow, #1 seed bank in the industry, guarantee on satisfaction, not just germination. Go check them out, all the hottest drops, all the best breeders. They've just put up some new stock. Go see if it's what you need to make your next run fire as hell. Likewise, in order to get the best run out of your genetics, you need to keep your garden happy and healthy, and for that we'd like to give a shout out to our friends at Koppert Biological Systems. These guys have all the best predators in the game to keep bug infestations away and to fight off any unwanted issues you may be experiencing. Check out their Spidex Vital or their Apipar M, both fantastic products for fighting off spider mites or aphids respectively, two pests a lot of growers struggle with, but they're here to help you get on top of it. Furthermore, huge shout out to ProMix. These guys have been in the industry for years. You know them, they make great media-based products using peat and mycorrhiza, but guess what? Now you can get their fantastic mycorrhizal product on its own. ProMix Connect, your #1 mycorrhizal product in the game, helping you to achieve greater yields, better resin, enhanced flavour and terpenes, helping you to make your next harvest the best to date. Check out ProMix Connect for all your mycorrhizal needs. We'd like to welcome our newest sponsor onto the show, Charlie's Cannabis. These guys are family-owned, small-batch craft cannabis out of Oklahoma City, providing you with fantastic flavours and incredibly high-quality flower for anyone who's in need of some high-quality medicine. Growing strains like Star Pebbles, Chemical Sunset, and so many more. Go check out Charlie's Cannabis for all the best craft, small-batch, Oklahoma-grown cannabis. They've got all the flavours and terps you need to make sure that you're puffing good. Last but not least, huge shout out to the Patreon gang. You guys know you're the lifeblood of the show, helping to ensure episodes happen. If you would like to help support the show and ensure future content is continued to be created, please go to patreon.com/the podcast and sign up. You'll get access to unheard content, additional interviews, giveaways, and so much more. Patreon gang, love you guys so much. Appreciate you. On this episode, we're joined by the one and only East Coast Chem King, JJ-NYC of Topdawg Genetics, here to talk all things Chem and Star Dog, East Coast history, Topdawg Genetics going forward, and so much more. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Alrighty, a big thank you and welcome for joining us today. One and only, the East Coast Chem King, JJ-NYC of Topdawg Genetics. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on finally. We've had so many requests for you, but my first question for you today is, what have you been smoking on recently?
Well, recently, I just actually did a release with the dispensary Verde. So, I started working with them in the beginning of the year. I gave them some genetics, and finally we got, the final product out. We started this discussions in December. I got those guys some pollen, some genetics, and finally we got a final product. So right now we're in the process of pheno hunting. So we did like, I don't know, like maybe like 1,000 seeds, or I don't know exactly the exact count, but I think we did about 200 of the mango, black piffs, the black piffs. And so that was the first release. And so I think out of the 200, I think we had a little over 100 females. So just, going through all the different phenotypes, judging them by smell, the way that they grow, We did some test washing and, just doing overall evaluation of the flower and everything. So we had to do that with the black pith. And now this week, we just released the Sour 2018, the New York City Chem F2s, some Star Cookie. There was the Chem Z and the UW Backcross. So I've been sifting through all this flour and judging it, and I have to go back to the team with my recommendations of my top three of what I like and everything. So luckily for me, this all fell on the holiday weekend, so I'm kind of enjoying myself.
That's awesome. It sounds like you're in for a good weekend. You just mentioned so many strains that I was interested to talk to you about, so thank you for that. The mango piff, that's an interesting one. Do you feel like there's a growing demand for those sorts of sativas nowadays?
Yeah, well, I mean, the pith has always been a staple in New York City. So, I mean, it's always been, the people that grew up in the New York metro area, most of them know about that haze. And so, I mean, it's always had a reputation, kind of like the sour diesel. I mean, it's really, comes from the same area that the sour diesel blossomed out of. And so I just think that a lot of people just, they might have heard about it, read about it, but never got to experience it. So, I was had done a lot of breeding with some of the mango stuff. And then, I had the black haze years ago, and I did a breeding with it. And so I had acquired the Pith S1 clone. So I thought it would be, the perfect choice for the mango Nigerian black haze, and that was the male times the Pith S1. So that's what made the black pith that we currently released.
Wow, that's great to hear. I'm one of those people you described who's heard so much about the piff but obviously never tried it. I guess the first question that I sort of think about is you hear a lot of names thrown around like Uptown Haze, Cuban Black Haze, the piff. Are they all the same thing or are they different?
Yeah, no, they're all the same thing. They're just different kind of slang terms for that strain, but also it's the same as the A5. The A5 from Amsterdam or the same genetics. They're a little bit different. The A5 um, was a little bit meatier, I think, but it was still kind of that same Colombian pissy type of genetics, which was very rare. I don't think that Neville ever really commercially released that strain. I think that was something that he had a small release of at the time, and this is what had survived out of that. Obviously they have the A5. I think the Catcha in Amsterdam has that's one of their house strains, and it's been a staple, for Amsterdam for a long time. And then the same could be said for the Black Haze, which was, came out of Florida originally. That's where they, originally started growing it. And then commercial shipments would come up to New York City. And so there was always a New York, Miami. There was always that was always like a cocaine route with guns and drugs, etc. So a lot, back then, all of that was just, balled into one. So they were trafficking stuff back and forth, bringing up, a lot of that up into New York. And then once they got established, I think they started producing, some of the stuff up in the New York City area. So I remember hearing a couple busts back in the day. And it was uptown, and it was the Dominicans and those guys up there that were running that stuff. So I mean, even to this day, they still have a stranglehold on that strain.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting aspects about it is how it's still so tightly held and so elusive. I guess another thing which came out about your previous answer was that you work with the S1, and it made me wonder, do you think that the real one still exists, or maybe the S1 is the best we have?
No, I think that the real one still exists. I just reacquired the black haze cutting. I haven't finished it out, so I can't verify it, but there seems to be a lot more people in the community that are using it now. It's getting passed around a lot more now, but that was around 10 years ago. So I had done some work with it, maybe 9-10 years ago, and people just weren't really interested in haze, really. There were a few people, but really since the death of Neville, it seems that there's been a revitalization of interest of the haze. So and then with people now talking about the black haze and the piff a lot more, and it being a little bit more available. People, I think, are once they try it, then they're interested in growing it. And my phenos are going about 70 to 77 days. So with the breeding that I've done, it originally started with NL5 haze times the Nigerian, and then back crossed into the Nigerian, and then crossed into the mango haze, and that's what made the mango Nigerian. And that was basically an earlier sativa strain, because there was a little bit of indica with the NL5 in it, and also the Nigerian was an early finishing sativa, then crossed into the mango, and that was kind of early finishing because that was that was the A5 times skunk one, I believe, and so that was a little more indica in there. So the lines basically have been kind of bred with a little bit of indica in them, but they were way more sativa leaning, and really just cut down the flowering time on a lot of those long flowering sativas. So then I crossed that into the black haze, and then obviously I crossed that into the S1, which was an early finisher. But the S1, I felt kind of fell short for me. I mean, it was really crystally, and it finished it early, and when you smelled it and it was grown, it smelled really piffy and everything. But when you smoked it, it didn't have that psychedelic sativa effect to it. And when I say that, when you smoke this, it's pretty much like a head high, and you can take a big hit and blow it out and close your eyes, and you'll just feel the effect of the third eye and a lot of moving parts inside of your head almost. It's kind of hard to describe when when you smoke some of these psychedelic sativas. They're more of an up high, more clear. You'll get a little racy, a little heart race. You feel your heart, beating a little bit. And for the seasoned smoker, you're able to handle that. But if you give that to someone that's not a seasoned smoker, they'll get they'll start to get anxiety, the racy effect, and what I call cannabis overdose. It's almost like when you eat too much edibles, you get the feeling that you're almost going to die. Your heart is racing, you're breathing heavy, you feel uncomfortable. And you just got with experienced smokers know that you just got to kind of just chill out and relax, and it's gonna go away. But for people that don't really know, they start getting more. They just contribute to the paranoia of the whole thing, and they don't. Instead of trying to relax, they go in and start getting more upset about it, and it just contributes to their some people go to the hospital. And so
Yeah, a great answer. I hope all of our listeners have been there at least once.
well, if you ate too much edibles, we've all been there at one point or another.
Yeah, it's interesting the positive feedback loop you describe. It's hilarious. Yeah, I think we've all been there at some point or another. Something interesting that you just referenced is it's so impressive that you're able to cut down the flowering time to 70 days ish, because those strains often go a lot longer. But something I specifically wanted to ask you in relation to that anxiety feeling is, I think I'm one of the only people who says this, but I get that feeling from the C5. And I love it. I love anxiety-inducing weed. I know it's a very non-popular opinion to express, but I think I'm the only one who prefers the C5 over the A5. Where do you fall on that one? Do you prefer one over the other?
I'm more of an A5 guy because I like that pissy kind of Colombian, where the C5 is kind of more of that floral tie, and which is nice. But I get more of the psychedelic feelings from the A5. And I guess the combination of the both would be equivalent to the Neville's haze.
Yeah, gosh, I guess that's one I've yet to try, but it would be really nice, I'm betting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been able to try some good samples in the past, and the real good ones, you kind of get a blend of both, surprisingly enough. Yeah. And that's the only way to describe it.
Yeah, lovely stuff there. Lovely stuff. Okay. To bring us back to sort of the original question about sort of what are you smoking, and you mentioned the facilities, I guess another question I'm interested in asking you is, if a facility was to come to you and ask to use some of your genetics, what are some of the genetics that you think would do better in a facility as opposed to, say, just like a home grow where, certain factors aren't as big of a deal? What are the ones you go to straight away for facilities?
Well, I mean, you got to go to, the Star Dogs, the Guavas, the original New York City Diesels. A lot of the stuff that's been a staple, of the brand for a long time. And it depends on what direction they want to go with it. A lot of it depends on, what the facility, like the guys that I'm working with now are more into pheno hunting, looking for phenos that are going to produce terps and hash and good flower. And so they're doing some research and development. So each place, not a lot of places are really willing to do that. They want to, they have a certain amount of space dedicated to their canopy, and really they want to maximize every square inch of that. And so depending on it really depends on the business model of the of the business itself.
Yeah, that's so promising to hear that they're willing to do that pheno hunting. Because I mean, I think a sentiment expressed by many guests in the past is that by doing that, you sort of create your own brand image because you've got this unique thing that no one else has because you went and found it. And then on top of that, it's like a star dog from JJ. Like, what more could you ask for?
Right, and it becomes almost an exclusive. So become your own exclusive house strain or pheno of that strain, and so you can call that your own and be exclusive with it. And as well as I do, if you get a really popular phenotype that's really special, that like just like a GMO for example, if you're able to find something of that magnitude and keep that, in-house as your own, obviously you're going to be able to attract that, that market to you because of that. So, and I think that's really going to be the future of cannabis, is really going to be branding and strains, and really kind of on the level of wine and beer, as in micro brewing. And you really, as a cannabis brand, you really got to define yourself on who you want to be, who are your customers, who your customers want to be. Do you want to be a Gucci, or do you want to be a Walmart? So I mean, each model can be profitable, and so but you have to define on who you want to be. And you want to be on a connoisseur, and attract knowledgeable people, or do you want to be the kind of business that's just going to attract people that are not in the know, that are not regular smokers? They come in, they're one and done, and you'll never see them again. And so, and a lot of it is, based on price point, so, a lot of people are just based on, they only want to spend so much money. Maybe they only smoke once or twice a week. So, quality to them is not going to be a big difference, where you have a guy that's smoking every day, and or if they're a medical patient. So when you really break down the customer pool, it gets quite intricate in the different type of people that can be your customer. So you really got to think about who you want to be.
Yeah, most definitely. That's a nice rundown there. And I guess the last sort of question before we move to a different topic is, we see a few different breeders working with facilities nowadays. Do you suspect that, not just for you, but sort of across the board in the industry, that this will be the way breeders move in the future, where they try to pair up with facilities, or do you think it's maybe not a big trend per se?
Well, I think, it's really going to be up to the facilities and how they want to brand themselves. And so, if they just want to create their own brand, and which is quite difficult but possible, built on quality or whatever your selling point is going to be. uh Otherwise, you're going to have to go with recognized brands in the industry. And I've said this before, good weed comes from good strains. Good strains come from good clones, and good clones come from good seeds. So, a lot of corporate people don't really, understand this concept, and just think you can just go out and get some weed, get whatever. Weed is weed. And so, it really, really goes down to, the type of people that are running the business. And, do they smoke pot themselves? Are they connoisseurs themselves? Or are they just, a corporate fund, just counting the money? So, there's a big difference between the two. And, when you're in touch and out of touch with the culture. So, it depends on, who you want to appeal to. And, but, for me, I see like I said, I see it as being as branding, as being, like you're gonna go into, like the New York structure is going to be, is not going to be integrated. So, as a dispensary, you're going to be able to buy wholesale from anyone across the board. So, so if that's the case now, what's going to separate each brand from itself? It's just really going to be the name and reputation on how good the product is. So, in the end, that's really, what's going to win out is, who has the best product consistently. And so I mean that's the way that I see, the market, eventually moving to, because when I go shopping, in a dispensary, I'm looking for the diesels, the chems, the cushes, anything with the fuel, the high end, and so, that's just the kind of, and I'm willing to travel, and that's just the kind of customer that I am. And I'm looking for certain types of strains and certain types of quality. So, it doesn't pay for me, just to get some average stuff for cheap, because, it doesn't matter how much I smoke of it, I'm not going to be satisfied. But when you smoke some chem or some fire, you just got to take one or two good puffs. Once you blow that out, you just get that warm, fuzzy feeling, and it's almost like that, warm blanket, over you. And it's just something that, I can't really, get from something else, that, even if I smoke a pound of it, I won't, so it just does not have the same effect for me. So
Yeah, great sentiment expressed there. So I'd love if you could take me back. What's your first experience with cannabis?
I was about 13 years old, and it was I think it might have been Christmas Day, and it had snowed. And when we were kids, we used to go out, shovel sidewalks and driveways for money. So it had snowed, and my next door neighbor called me up, and like, yeah, let's go out, and do some shoveling. So, we go out, we had our regular people that we used to, shovel on a regular basis. So we were heading over to the one people's house, and we decided, we cut through some woods, and we stopped, and he pulled out a joint, and he had older brothers. And so, and I was the oldest one in my family. So, I had never seen any, weed before or anything like that. So, we, he lit it up, and we smoked it, and, I was kind of feeling a little silly and everything. And we started shoveling, and, we couldn't finish the job. We got like, we were just so, kind of silly, and, it was just so much work. We just kind of bailed out of it, and just walked away from the job. So, and then after that, I don't know, I might have been in like seventh grade, and, I was in middle school. So, there were maybe a couple other times that, we had gotten weed. I remember we had bought a nickel bag from someone, and that was like $5 worth. And so we all, there's three of us, so we all, chipped in, bought this nickel bag from an older guy in the neighborhood, and we smoked a couple bowls of it. We were down by the river, And, so we smoked a couple bowls, and then a bunch of these older kids started, coming around, and they were having this big party down where we were hanging out. And so, we started hanging out with them. And so we were smoking a little bit, and some guy was like, "Who's got some weed?" And so, and we were like, "Oh, we got some." So we showed him the bag. He's like, "Oh, I'll give you $15 for it." And so we were like, "Yeah, sure." So we had already smoked, like 3 or 4 bowls, and then we sold it for $15. So, we each wound up, getting high for free and getting $5 each, and so we were really psyched about that. And so, that was one of the other, early experiences I had, but I really didn't start using regularly until I got into high school, when I got into ninth grade. And once I got there, I mean, there was like a smoking area on the school grounds, and there was a tree there, and it was on a little bit of a knoll. So it was like a little bit of a hill there. And so all the kids used to just, gather up in the morning before school, and everyone used to smoke cigarettes there. And everyone used to just crowd. It was like a circle around the tree. And so, you can get into that circle, and everyone would be smoking cigarettes. And then, back then, they used to sell joints for $1, and they would have them in cigarette packs. So, someone would come out, and they'd fucking open up their cigarette pack and be like, dollar joints. And so, they would, everyone in that circle would just start buying joints, so you would get up with your friends and be like, you know, um, yeah, we got $5. And so, you'd make a deal, be like, all right, give us 6 for 5. You have 6 for 5. So, we would plan, all right, we're going to smoke one joint in the morning. We'll smoke, one at lunchtime, one after school, and then 2, so we would have all that weed like planned out for the whole day, on how we were going to smoke it. And, we were only kids back then. So when you had, 3, 4, 5 kids, and you each put up $1 or $2, all of a sudden you had, $5, $10. Now you could be like, all right, give me 12 for 10, or, so you'd be able to cut deals. And so, that's how you survived when we were kids, going to school. We did this with our lunch money, and, we didn't work and just got money from our parents. And, we were just trying to get high.
Great answer. What a nice little stroll down memory lane. I mean, I don't fault you if you don't know the answer to this, but do you know what you were smoking at the time?
Early on, there was really no names. There was really kind of like Mexican and Colombian, and so that was like early on. But there was always some Hawaiian, and there was exotic around. It was really hard to get. There was a lot of blonde hash, the red hash, black hash. But around in the early, I'd say, I don't know, 81, 82, that's when the real first, we called it Christmas tree scents. So that was really when the first real kind buds started coming around. And I remember, I think it was, used to be able to get it for like $200 an ounce, which was a lot of money back then. And, people, I mean, you could maybe sell a gram for $10 back then, so, it wasn't really, much of, of a profit margin, because, back then, like I was telling you, there were dollar joints, and, a half ounce would be like $20, an ounce would be $40. And that would be kind of just your typical commercial type of weed. Out of an ounce, you should be able to roll I don't know, 50 to 60 joints, depending how big they were. So that's how people would sell them, for $1 each, So yeah, the Christmas tree scents used to, come around and used to be good Hawaiian and stuff like that. But, and I also remember when I was in school, the janitor was selling weed, and he used to and he had his brother lived in Harlem and up in New York City, and I know that he used to get the weed was coming from Harlem, and he used to get this stuff. I think I think it was $50 an ounce, which they're either 50 or 60, I forget. I know that it was more expensive than your regular, standard commercial stuff. And originally, he came in and he handed my friend a pack of, a pack of joints to sell for him. And they were these little tiny, like pinhead joints. I mean, they were ridiculous. I mean, like people used to laugh at him because there used to be this guy Stymie, and he used to sell these joints. And I mean, people used to know his route to school, and they used to wait for him to they cut him off before he got onto the grounds, because when you used to get Stymie joints, they were these big, huge bombs, and you could actually unroll them and get 2 joints out of the one. You know what I mean? But I had these little skinny pinheads, and like, that people used to ridicule them. They're like, "Oh, that's a toothpick, this and that." But when you smoke that, man, it fucked you up. So, a lot more than the regular stuff. And so, the janitor was, then my friend showed me what he was getting from the janitor, and then I hooked up with him. And so I was just getting I was just getting ounces from him and just selling it myself. And I remember I just called it rainbow weed, but it had all different colors in it. It had like some red, some green, some brown, some gold, had all different colors. But I suspect that was some type of Thai weed or something like that, because I just remember that just being, some of the strongest stuff around. Like I was explaining to you, once people smoked it, they were just like, "Oh, let me get some more of that stuff." So that was, another memorable, strain day. And I also remember getting like some real gold, some real Colombian gold, the Santa Marta gold. A friend of mine, he had an older brother. He had 2 older brothers, and so yeah, I guess one of the older brothers. I think it just came down the line of brothers. The older brother got it, and gave it to the other brother, and then he gave it to the younger brother, who was my friend. So we wound up getting, like, I think we got an ounce of it, and we split it half and half. And yeah, I remember that just being bright gold, and back then there was the real gold and then the fool's gold, which they called. So the fool's gold was the stuff that looked gold, but it was just trash. It didn't get you high. So I used to call that fool's gold. But the real gold was kind of hazy. It had like this hazy type of tip to it. And so I just remember that. And I just remember it being seedless and this kind of bright yellow gold, and just kind of having that real sativa type of look to it. And if you're familiar with Lawrence Chernak, he has a cannabis book, and he actually has a picture of some gold in there, and it looked exactly the same. When I saw that picture, I was like, that's what we got back in the day. And I was only able to get it once, but it was memorable. And that's how things were back then. You would see something, you'd get it once, and that was it. And so
Wow, what a great little history lesson right there. I mean, something people probably notice when they look at the collective work done by Topdawg, and you can see that there's obviously sort of this indica side of things with, the chems and whatnot, but there's also the sativa side of things. Do you think that this sort of exposure to these really sort of quite legendary strains at the young age instilled in you a sort of a love for those sativas, or is it more so you just want to provide a bit of everything?
No, you kind of, hit it on the head. I really built the brand on things that I like and experienced. So, I know that I'm a little older than most of the people. So I was able to experience, a lot of things early on. I was able to catch kind of what I call the late 70s Cheech and Chong era of what I explained to you of $20 halves and $40 ounces and all that kind of stuff, where that kind of changed in the early 80s or in the early to mid 80s once the drug war really stepped up, and that's what really cultivated the whole indoor scene. Because in the early 80s, I remember that's when Ronald Reagan came into he was the president, and I was in high school from 80 to 84, and that's when he first took over. So, within the first 2 years, things started to change. And by the last 2 years, like I said, things, started to change a little bit more. And, by the time I got out of high school, by 1985, the government really put a halt on a lot of the imports that were coming into the country. And that prompted a whole shift in the drug trade to where they started importing cocaine instead of bales of marijuana. So by 1985, 1986, the streets just became flooded with imported cocaine, and and there wasn't much import marijuana coming in. And looking back at that time in history, up in the Pacific Northwest, that's kind of like when the indoor grows of Seattle, Greg McAllister, the NL guys up there, they started, those indoor grows in the early 80s during those times. And yeah, so that just really kind of prompted the whole indoor thing, where that's where it began, because of the pressure, of the imports. So people were just like, well, we'll just start producing it ourselves, to the point, to where, we just started to become a self-efficient, producing country ourselves. A lot of people have never experienced a drought, meaning where you couldn't get weed. I mean, like I said, back in the 80s, it was easier to get cocaine than it was to get weed. And so, yeah, it became very, difficult. So I mean, and that just kind of prompted the whole indoor scene to, to where it's kind of evolved into today, to where, it's kind of amazing if you really kind of look back at the history of it, or really know anything about it.
What a fascinating sort of way to view back on things. And it all makes perfect sense, right, with the rise of the drug war and whatnot. If we think back to when you were talking about, how to sort of you befriended the groundskeeper and you sort of got access to the better quality stuff, it's clear that you're quite a good networker, which I'm sure has helped you a lot over the years. Do you remember any of the strains that you were seeing from those indoor grows, say, before chem came out, sort of, like 80s slash super early 90s? Were there any memorable ones that you can remember at all?
Well, I remember seeing my first grow, And this was a guy who was in Times Square in New York City on 46th Street, and he was in between Broadway and 6th Avenue. So, I mean, that was like a block away right from the center of Times Square. And he was a weed dealer. And so, I had hooked up with him in the late 80s. Mid to late 80s. And so, that's where I used to go and buy my weed from, and he would have, regular Mexican weed which was green and sellable, and like an upper mid, we used to call them. And then he would get, exotic strains and different stuff like that. But, he wound up like monopolizing his building and wound up getting like, I don't know, like the building itself maybe had only like, I think it had an apartment on each, I had 2 apartments on each floor. And so there was one guy that was in the building and he rented one of the places, but he also lived up in Albany. So he wasn't in the building much. And then there was like a music repair store downstairs. And then he wound up getting the next 3 apartments all the way up. And so he sold weed out of one. He had one that he had storage out of. That's where he stored his weed. And then the other one, he had a little grow. And so this was probably like in the late 80s, like 89, 90, somewhere in that range. And so these guys were going to Amsterdam and getting the early skunk, the silver pearl, a lot of the Sensi type of strains, and they were growing them, and they had this little hydro setup. And so that was, some of the first indoor, stuff that I had seen. And and so most of that stuff was seeds that came over from Amsterdam. And so they were going back and forth. And, back then, I was really green and wet behind the ears. And, I didn't really have a lot of knowledge about it, but I had an interest in it. And so it was probably about that time that I actually started collecting seeds. I would get a bag of good weed and find a seed out of it and save it. And I was like, yeah, maybe one day I'll be a grower. And so, unfortunately, that seed collection got seized by the police in one of my many brushes with the law. But and that was even before I really decided to be a grower too. So.
Okay, I mean, I guess the next question for me is, what was it that stimulated you to start growing as opposed to just sort of being involved in it all?
Well, so, I'll go back, even a little bit farther than that. Like I said, I had this guy in Times Square who was my pot dealer and everything. So, and everyone from my town was going to this guy and everything. So, and then I had heard that one of the kids from our town was selling weed up in Central Park. And I was like, really? I was like, if that kid can do it, I was like, I can do it too, because the guy was a total loser. So I went up there and I checked out the scene, but it was late. It was late in the summer. So, I went up there and it was up in Sheep Meadow, up in Central Park. And it was just the open, free drug market. That's the only way I could describe it, of people just walking around selling acid, mushrooms, weed, hash. They would sell beer. I mean, you could just sit down and you used to be able to smoke and people used to, they'd have circles of kids just all around, different circles of people. Some people would bring guitars and drums and have little circles, and it was just a really cool scene. I was just like blown away. I was like, wow, I can't believe this, but it was late in the season. So I was like, well, I'm going to come out next year. So, I wound up, getting some really good, some really good green came in, and we used to call it Pretendica, because it was almost like real indica, but it had a few seeds in it. You know what I mean? So the real indica was seedless, but this stuff was like kind of like squishy and like spongy, but there were a few seeds in it. It was more expensive than your regular commercial, but it was well worth it, because the price, you can kick up the price out of it. And if you can find someone that wasn't really in the know, and you could squeeze all of them seeds out of it, you could sell that off as kind buds. So I was able to get, I think like 5 pounds of it, and I just squirreled that away, thinking, all right, this is going to be what I'm going to bring out to the park in the spring. So that's what I did. So, the day came, I might have scouted out, and went up there one day and seen that it was happening. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to go out there. So, I had all my, had my Pretendica with me, and I hit the park. I go through one of the side gates, I start walking through, and I see some guy sitting under a tree with a guitar with his girlfriend, listening to the Grateful Dead on a little radio. And I think to myself, oh, wow, this guy's got to be cool. You know what I mean? So I go over to him, and then I try, hustling him. And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to sell him weed, this and that. And then he says to me, well, let me show you what I have, what I'm selling. And he whips out some real kind bud. I'm just like, whoa, I'm blown away, So I'm like, so I get friendly with the guy and everything. And so, we become friends, and so, and I was, just trying to learn the ropes out there. So I was kind of hanging with him, and he would tell me, this guy's, but watch out for this one or that one, or, so, we were sitting there one day, and some guy comes strolling up, and the guy's name was Ben. He's like, hey, Ben. He's like, and I guess that someone had sent him out there to look for Ben, because Ben was a known kind bud dealer in Central Park. So this guy comes up, and he's like, hey, I got some kind bud that I grew. Do you want to buy some? And so, Ben is like, yeah, I only have, X amount of dollars for X amount of weed. And then he looks to me, and he's like, do you want to buy some? And I'm like, yeah, I'll buy. I'm like, I'll buy some, you know what I mean? Because back then, like, trying to find someone, to try to find a grower was just like, it was like hitting a gold mine, because it was just so, there were people out there who were doing it, but finding those people was just so far and few in between that, it was very hard. So, when I really got the first chance, other than the guy that I knew in Times Square, who grew, but, I was, really excited, to be able to buy some. So, maybe like a week or two later, I'm out there by myself, Ben's not around, but who do I see walking across the meadow is the kind bud guy. And I'm like, yo, man, come on over, And he's like, yo, where's Ben? I'm like, I don't know. He's not here today. I'm like, what? You got some kind? He's like, yeah, I got, whatever. And I was just like, well, you know what? I'll take it all. I think he used to come in with quarters. There were like 6-gram quarters what he used to come in with, So I was like, I'll take them all, you know what I mean? And so, I hooked up with the guy, and unfortunately for Ben, he wound up getting all fucked up on drugs. And so, I was just out there on a regular basis, just grinding away, and started working with this guy. And so, this guy wound up being the weasel. This was the guy. He came out originally with some, he used to call it the RFK skunk. And the story behind that was that him and a friend had gone to a Dead show down at RFK Stadium down in Washington, D.C., and bought a bag of kind, and they had some seeds in it, and they split up the seeds, and then they both decided to grow. So, they both started growing, and they needed a place to get rid of it. So they came out to the park, so, his original product was the RFK 1, 2, and 3. And after that, he wound up going to a fish show and meeting chemdog Greg. And so I guess, they, back then, like one grower meeting another grower was another big thing, because, all right, now I have someone that I can trust, trade genetics and information with. So, that's, Greg was growing the Chem 91 and the Super Skunk. And, my friend had the RFK, and, I don't know if he might have had some stuff from Amsterdam, but he wound up driving up to Massachusetts from Staten Island, bought, traded, for the Chem 91 and Mass Super Skunk. And then he brought that down to Staten Island, and by that time I had kind of, cornered that whole market, meaning, like, I told him, listen, I'll buy everything you got. I got cash. I'll pay you COD. You know what I mean? So he loved that, idea. So he was like, hey, listen, doing, business up here in the park isn't really a good idea. We should go down to wetlands. And so he's like, down at wetlands, it was a bar. And, on Tuesday nights, you have Grateful Dead night, and so you can go downstairs, and they had like drum circles and guitars and stuff like that. But they let you, smoke weed down there. So, we would, meet up down there, and, we wound up meeting AJ down there, and, he just kind of just sniffed us out, because, I would wait for him, and people knew who I was, and they'd be asking me for weed, and I'd be like, wait, and so I'd be waiting for him. They would see him come over to me, we would do our business, you know what I mean? And, and once, when we were doing our business, obviously, I would take a bag out and open it up. And as soon as I would open that bag, I would just permeate the whole room. And so people would just be there, like standing there, like staring at us, the whole time, and then eventually that's how kind of AJ caught on to us. And then, I reached the point where he'd be like, hey, listen, let's go into the back office. I have access to it. Let's go back and do our deals back there. So, so we, all started, getting friendly, and we used to smoke back there, and it became exclusive. And so, I was able to, that was just the beginning of the whole chem story, when he started doing a little bit of breeding. He created, the underdog, which was, NL Super Skunk times Chem 91. And he had that. And then, he was running that. He was also running some other strains in there. And, that's where we suspect the the sour diesel came out of, because, I had told you earlier that I used to collect seeds. So, once the chem started coming around, I used to collect seeds out of the chem. And, once I started growing, when I first started growing, I popped some of them chem seeds and they came out, very sour, and I remember I wound up giving, I remember I sexed the plant and knew it was a female, and I gave it to my friend, and I told him that, that this is a female, and we weren't able to finish it. And so when he finished it, he wound up coining that the guava cut. And so, that was the original guava, but not the guava that we know today, and so, the story, behind that is that wound up just coming back, as in like as in Star Dog. So he thought that was the closest thing to the original guava that he remembers, but it was chem genetics, but just a different breeding. So yeah, so that was really, I was lucky enough to meet, Mike, the weasel, and really, and really what really started to happen, so I was just, out there selling weed. And once I met Mike, and, he got me interested in growing. And so in like 99, I decided I was gonna, I decided I wanted to start growing. And what I did was I rented an apartment up in Washington Heights, up by the George Washington Bridge. And I put a hydro table in there and a couple lights. And Mike wound up giving me some cuttings of the Oasis. He was running the Oasis from Amsterdam. So those were the very first cuttings that I got of Oasis. And I put them up there in that apartment. And what wound up happening was that the electrical box burnt out. Somehow, I overjuiced it. And so, yeah, it didn't work out. So I walk in one day and the lights are out, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I couldn't fix the box myself. I called the super. He's saying, well, I got to get into the apartment. I got all my grow shit in there and I can't let him in. So what am I going to do? I was in a dilemma. And so right at that same time, some people that I used to sell weed to, they were two brothers, and they had a spot down in a building on Fifth Avenue. And they knew the people that owned the building, and they were like the maintenance workers of the building. And they had charged all this money on a credit card, like $15,000 worth of grow stuff. They bought lights and tables, hydro, all this stuff. And they were, they had seen something in High Times magazine about a perpetual sea of green harvest. You can harvest every week, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that's, what they were trying to do. And it was just failing. And so, they asked, and I had told them about what I was doing. And so they had known that I had a little thing. And so when my apartment went down, I told them, hey, listen, I have a whole bunch of plants that are going to die. And they're like, well, just bring them down here. And they were like, and then we made an agreement to where I was going to help them, get that room turned around and try to help them get their money back. So we formed a partnership. And so I moved those plants down to Fifth Avenue, and they had, this maintenance area that was a pretty big space, and it was like they made it into like a locker room, but they made it to where you open one of the lockers, you walked through into another room, and that's where the grow room was. So they had built a wall, and then they had these lockers that you walked through, and so that's where the grow room was. And it was just kind of like improperly put together and everything, and they were splicing into the electric all over the building. And eventually what happened was I helped them get their money back and everything. And we were having problems in the room. It was getting too hot during the summertime, and working out the bugs. And they had ran some new wires and tapped into the hallway electric, which was on the other side of the wall. So they spliced into that. So I go in there on a hot day, and it's really hot, and I turn on an air conditioner and walk out, not knowing anything, that I just, overloaded the circuit, so I'm in the city down at my apartment or office, and then I get a phone call saying that the fire department's in front of the building, and that there's a fire in the building. So, I hop in my car, I drive past, and sure enough, the fire department's out front. And so lucky for us, they located, I guess, in the hallway where the fire was, and it was up in the ceiling. And lucky for us, it wasn't on the other side of the wall, and that's where the grow was. So they popped their head up there. They saw where the fire was, and so they didn't discover the grow. But needless to say, that was kind of the beginning of the end to that spot. We were getting complaints of people in the building that were, like 20 stories up, and they were smelling weed, because we were just exhausting out. We were on the bottom floor and just exhausting out of a window. And this is before charcoal filters and all that stuff. So you just had raw exhaust just going up. And the thing was, it was like they had like courtyards in these buildings, and so where the buildings kind of like they all kind of come together, it almost becomes like a shaft in between. So, and it just goes straight up, until but there's like a little space in between, the buildings. And so that's where we were pumping out of. So the people upstairs, it was just shooting up. So when they opened their windows, they could smell weed. And I had a kid in the building that I used to sell weed to, and he'd be like, yeah, I know that there's someone growing weed in the building. He goes, there's these Russian mobster guys are down on the first floor. He's like, and I know it's got to be them, but he didn't know it was actually us that was doing it. So so that was really my first real experience in growing. And then after that, that was like in 99. That lasted like a year or two. And then I think after that ended, it took me like a year to get my shit back together on my own. And I just wound up going upstate New York. I rented out a house up by Hunter Mountain, and that's where I had my first my first grow myself. And the people that I was and then by this time, the circle of growers had evolved into a few more. So the circle had widened, and I told them, like, yeah, I want to start growing. And they're like, all right, we'll help you. So they helped me, build my first room, did it correctly, the right setup, gave me sour diesel clones, which I had given them originally because, I was selling the weed. So, I would be like, all right, I know what strains sell. I know what people want. You do what I tell you. If I give you these clones, you grow them, and it's gonna help us all. So, that's what I had started to do, was getting, I started networking, and I was able to get the sour diesel. And so I gave that to them, and then they gave it back to me. And that was one of the first strains that I started growing, on my own, was the sour diesel. And then eventually I wound up meeting chemdog Greg, and I wound up trading him the sour diesel for the chemd. And so, and then when I first, and then once I got my own place, I had been, selling weed all these years. And, like I was saying, I would tell these people what to grow. And a lot of times I'd be like, we'd have certain strains. I'd be like, well, what happened to this Kush or this NL? And they'd be like, oh, we lost it. We don't have it anymore. I'd be like, man, that fucking shit, that was good. What happened? Well, whatever, for whatever reason, we lost it. So once I started growing myself and getting these elite clones, that's when I decided I wanted to start in preservation. And it was really, all right, I got this sour diesel, I was like, all right, now, it's a clone only strain, so there is no sour diesel male. So, so I was just like, well, I'm going to make my own male. So I was growing the chemd and all these different strains. So I was like, well, if I'm going to make my own male, I'm going to use whatever the best weed, the strongest weed that I have, and back then it was the chem weed. So I decided, all right, chemd is what I'm going to, base my male off of. And so, and then I was like, well, what are you going to use for a donor male? So I had a guy going to Amsterdam, and I gave him, a bunch of money, and I'm like, I gave him a whole bunch of lists of strains to get me from Sensi Seeds, and that's what he did. So he comes back, and he had the Hindu Kush, the Afghan one, skunk, NL, a whole bunch of different ones. But I was like, I'll have to grow these out to see what they are, how they grow. So I grew all, well, really, I just grew the Hindu Kush and the Afghan out, and decided that the Afghan would be a better choice of a male donor, because it wasn't very dominant in taste and smell. It kind of had like a piney, like a kind of like a piney kind of, I'm trying to think of the different word to describe it, but yeah, it wasn't really dominant. It was kind of blandish. It grew really thick stemmed and single cola, just a really big top single cola. And so I decided, that would probably be the best, male donor for, to cross into the chemd. And so that, that's what I did. I did the first cross, the Afghan chemd, and then I back crossed into the chemd again and made the double dog, and then did the third cross, which would have been the second back cross, would made the tray dog. And so once I made the tray dog, I decided that, that would probably be a good representation of the chemd, a good, strong male. And so, I decided, one of the first, breedings that I was going to do, I had just gotten the Chem 4 at that time. So I was like, well, combine two different chems and see what happens. And that eventually became a star dog. And when I made those seeds, I just wound up, I grew some out myself and found the Corey cut within the first, I think, I only popped like maybe like 4 or 5 seeds, and I found the Corey cut. And then I wound up giving some seeds to people that were affiliated with High Times. And some of the seeds got into the hands of Kyle Cushman. He grew out the Star Dog, found his pheno keeper, which he entered, I think it was in the San Francisco Medical Cup in 2010, and won second place with that. So that really kind of, put the Star Dog, on the map. People started noticing it. Some of the other seeds got into Andre Grossman. He was a freelance photographer who had an apartment in New York City. He was affiliated with High Times, and he held and always grew the strawberry cough. And so that was Kyle Cushman's strain that he brought to High Times, and that became the office strain. So at any time, you used to be able to go down to the Park Avenue office, and they might even have had a mother of the strawberry cough in the office, and you used to be able to get clones from it. And they didn't have it there. They had it like really close by. So you used to be able to go down there and be like, I want some strawberry cough, and they would get it to you within an hour or two. So Andre started growing a Star Dog, and found a guava cut. And so he brought that into the office, and that also became an office strain and accessible to people, to High Times. And so when Andre started growing it, he started obviously taking pictures of it. They did a centerfold of it. They did a write-up on it and everything. And so getting back to the original guava thing, so that cutting started getting out around town. And my friend who I had given the original guava to wound up getting that cutting, and he calls me up one day, and he's like all excited. He's like, I got it back, I got the guava back. And so I first saw the guava from him, not knowing that it was my seeds that I had given to so it was like a whole eventually it all came full circle, and we figured out everything. And that's been kind of like the story of the chemdog, and a lot of the stuff that's been on the internet, because a lot of it has come full circle, because a lot of these people have popped up on the internet, and we've been able to connect, and we've been able to figure out the chemdog story, and all of that now. That's really become legend.
Wow, what a phenomenal answer. I think everyone's going to have to go listen to that a few times. You just tied so many pieces of the puzzle together for me, so thank you so much. I guess one of the first questions, and I'm going to have about 1 million questions for you. I think I read somewhere that you were involved in being able to help reconnect P-Bud and Joe Brand with chemdog. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. Originally, my original interaction with the internet was, I was sitting in my office one day, and a guy comes in. He's like, hey, you see on the internet, where this guy is, taking credit for the sour diesel. And, back then I wasn't very internet savvy, or didn't really, it wasn't really of my interest at that time. So I wind up, going on this site called Overgrow, and I see this guy Res Dog talking about sour diesel. And I'm like, sour diesel? I'm like, that's that's us. Like, and I'm like, I know what, the whole story, you know, of, I have all of this knowledge and all of this stuff. So, you know, um, and at that time I had been, had been growing already a few years and stuff. So, and then that's kind of like when Soma came out with the New York City diesel, which we were, quite offended by. And so, I decided to create an account and set the record straight. So, that's where, I became JJ-NYC. I logged on there, and my very first post was just this kind of a rant that just kind of set the record straight and called out Soma. And, people were kind of like shocked by it and being like, who the fuck are you? You know what I mean? And so, eventually, uh, the whole chem thing started out on overgrow and all that. And then it went down. It got shut down. And, I got all kind of freaked out by it, and I kind of dropped offline for 6 months to a year. And then, decided, to pop back on, and, found out that everyone had moved to IC Mag. So, I started, posting on IC Mag. And this was probably right around the time that I had gotten the ChemD. And so, I remember the very first time I did a search on chemdog, and this guy's account popped up. It was called Joe Brand, and he made a post saying, does anyone know anything about chem or dog, or I forget what it was, you know what I mean? So, I started a whole dialogue with him, you know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, eventually it just kind of led to the, getting those guys back together. We figured out the whole, I mean, and when it was coming, when it was happening, it was really incredible to really, start piecing all that history together and figuring out the puzzle. So yeah, I was able to, we figured out that, it had, that Greg had gotten, it was Greg. And that Greg still had some of those original seeds left. And so I had, I hooked those guys up, and they reunited. And Greg wound up sending Joe 4 of the original seeds that he found in that dog bud. And that wound up being the Chem 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, I was, very instrumental in doing all of that.
Yeah, wow. It's so impressive how interconnected all the relationships and stories are. If I could just go back a moment to when you were talking about, how the Staten Island crew first sort of linked with Mass G and all those sorts of things. I guess something I'd love to ask you is, what was your first experience like when you first smoked the Chem 91?
It was just kind of game changing, because we never saw anything like that. And even like the super skunk too. I mean, when you would crack a jar of that super skunk, it would just permeate the room. It was just something that, it's just something you just cannot find today. And so when people talk about roadkill and all this other stuff, you know I know what it is. I experienced it. It was something at one time. and why it's changed and it's gotten lost. No one really knows the reason why. And a lot of it, is people, you could say it's genetic drift, and which could be a part of it. I think it was really hard for people to really hold on to a lot of these genetics because they were so loud. So many people had gotten busted with those genetics over the years. And if you really think about it, a lot of the strains that we have today are really responsible because of one person. If you look at the chems, if it wasn't for Greg, we wouldn't have the chems. If you look in, and you can go down a list of different strains that people are associated with. And, so if it really wasn't for those people who preserved them and then shared them, we wouldn't have what we have today. So, we did have, those genetics were, plentiful at one time, but unfortunately, that was during a time of the drug war and heavy prohibition, and a lot of that stuff just got snuffed out, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a real shame, isn't it? And I guess some of the more smelly stuff before carbon filters is obviously just logistically hard to sort of manage long term. I had a question or two about the sour diesel for you that I was hoping you might be able to shed some light on. Back when, around that time when, the sour first came out, were people running primarily just like one strain in a room, or were there multiple? Because I guess I'm trying to figure out, is it more likely that it was just an S1 or like some sort of cross pollination? And then as a little follow up, do you accept the versions given by people like Weasel or Vondo on, say, the Adam Dunn show when they talk about the sour diesel history, or do you think it would maybe went down a little differently to what we see online?
Well, I do know, what he, what he was growing at the time, because I was selling it. I know that he had the 91, he had the Mass Super Skunk, uh, he had the RFK stuff. I think he had the DNL, and so you know, that's what I suspect. Something in the room hermied and got into the 91, obviously, and that's where the sour diesel came from. Now, there's a lot of speculation on, is it super skunk? Is it DNA? But the one thing that I can point to is the skunk VA, and he's very adamant. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of his early super skunk photos that kind of show big, stretchy, kind of sour-like plants. And from what I remember, and what's also documented in High Times when they did the photo shoot of the Mass Super Skunk and of the chemdog from Greg back in the day, that plant was more of a more medium squat plant. The plant that the weasel had was the same exact one that Greg had. And I sold the bud of it. I saw it grow, and it was not the big, super stretchy pheno that Skunk VA had. So I don't know if it was the same genetics. I know that there's a whole different story on that super skunk. It was down in Virginia originally. It, I think that I think it came. There was a trade. The super skunk came up from Virginia to Massachusetts, and then the chemdog was picked up from Massachusetts and brought out to California to Skunk VA, and that was the 91. And so Yeah, I don't really know what if that was a different pheno that they gave him or what. I know at that time, I think Skunk VA was out in California. I think he set up the deal with his friends. So what was actually brought up and traded, I mean, is anyone's guess, because I think there's a big discrepancy between the super skunk that Greg had and then the super skunk that Skunk VA had, because they were two totally different phenotypes. I mean, if you want to do your research on Greg's mass super skunk and find out the characteristics of it, you can, but you will find that it's not that really tall, stretchy, sour-like pheno that Skunk VA had. So who's right, who's wrong? I mean, we'll never know. I mean, I guess if you can really get into some sequencing and stuff like that, maybe some of that stuff could come out in the future, but to me it's just speculation, and I can only go by with what I know and knew at the time. So I mean, I have my doubts on it just because I think they're two different phenos. I mean, I could be wrong. There's a whole nother story behind that, which I don't know. So, I mean, I guess there's more investigating facts that need to come out, from, I guess, the Virginia Beach crew in Skunk VA.
Yeah, look, I think you might be on the money there, because when I've spoken to Skunk VA more recently, he's sort of said to me that now that he thinks back on it, the skunk cutting he got back from Greg years later, he goes, I was so excited to have it back, I'm like, oh, the super skunk's back. And he goes, but now that I really think about it, he goes, I'm not sure it was the same plant, which is sort of what you're saying, that the plant Greg got might not have been the original one Skunk VA had.
It's not. And so that's why, and I've seen phenos that came out of that skunk, that underdog. It was NL super skunk times 91, and that was not a big stretcher. It kind of grew, kind of cush, well, kind of like the Kush, but not as stretchy. It was more of the bud structure. It was more of a medium stout plant. It didn't yield very well, but unfortunately, that underdog, we killed it because of genetic drift. It just petered out after a while, and we had the original cut, and it just changed. I mean, I've seen it with different strains over the years, not only strains that I've grown, but strains that I've sold, and I can remember the wheelchair used to be in the city. And I mean, the early wheelchair was exactly that, wheelchair weed. I mean, you would smoke that shit and you were incapacitated. Towards the end, it just kind of gotten like bland and just kind of petered out. And so, I've seen genetic drift and strains just kind of just dud out.
So there you have it, gang. Part 1 of 3 done and dusted. What'd you think? Some major history lessons being dropped on the East Coast scene there, and huge shout out again to JJ for taking the time to come on the show, and a huge shout out to our amazing sponsors for helping us to make the show happen. seedsherenow, best seed bank in the game. Go hit them up for all the hottest drops from all the breeders you love. Guarantee on satisfaction at the end of a cycle, not just guarantee on germination. Why would you go elsewhere? Likewise, go check out Koppert Biological Systems. With all the most advanced technologies, these guys have got you covered and will keep the pests at bay. Check out the Apipar M or the Spidex Vital, both of them incredible product. It's going to help you overcome any infestation you have, or more importantly, keep away a potential infestation. Nothing better than being proactive and getting on top of a problem before it even exists, guys. Go check out Koppert Biological Systems. Incredible sponsors, we really appreciate them. And last but not least, ProMix Connect, your number one mycorrhizal product in the game. You know ProMix, you've probably bought their peat before. Guess what? They've got a killer mycorrhizal product now. And if you check it out, I promise you, your plants will be better off for it, no questions asked. Better resin, better flavour, better yield. You know mycorrhizal is fantastic. I don't need to sell you on it. Go check it out. ProMix Connect, number one mycorrhizal product in the game. Furthermore, huge shout out to Charlie's Cannabis, your number one family-owned small batch craft cannabis producer out of Oklahoma, providing you with incredible flavours, Chemical Sunset, Star Pebbles, so many more on the horizon. Check out their Instagram to see what they're pheno hunting at the moment. I'm really excited to have these guys on board, and I think it's going to be magical to see what they produce going forward. If you need some high quality smoke, you're in Oklahoma, go check out Charlie's Cannabis. You'll be puffing good, I promise. Finally, a shout out to the Patreon gang. I love you, I appreciate you, you are the best. If you want to get access to unheard content, early access to interviews, giveaways, so much more, go check it out. We recently got a Discord, guys. I'm a bit late to the Discord party, but I tell you what, I'm loving it. Some good chats going on there. Be sure to check out Patreon if you want to help support the show and ensure content continues to be made. That's it for part 1, guys. I'll see you back for part 2 and part 3. Thanks for hanging around. We'll see ya.